Hello there, I'm Rafael Di Furia, back at it again on another Friday night for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. This week I wanted to talk about some of the biggest mistakes that I have seen among expats in Portugal. Roll that intro. Over my decade plus living abroad, I can say there are a number of mistakes that I've seen and patterns that people tend to follow when they're right off the boat. I'm not saying this is anybody from a specific country other than maybe I'll talk a bit about Americans just because that's the country that I come from. But I also am kind of talking about just in general, human behavior, some of the things that we tend to fall into. And the first thing, I'm not going in any particular order here, but I've mentioned this recently, and that is if you are going to be coming to Portugal and you're assuming you're renting, do not pay the agent an upfront fee. Do not pay the agent any kind of retainer fee. This is something that I am seeing starting to pop up more and more among agents for rental properties. If you're looking for somebody who will go out and hunt for you, that's a little bit of a different thing. However, the problem with this is that some agents will have very, very limited resources available to them. And a lot of the places that they will look online will be available to you to look at for free. They're not going to necessarily have extra access. They may have some connections to people and they know someone and they can get you closer to an apartment. But if you are being asked for a retainer fee at the beginning, up front, before anything even happens, look the other way. You're going to find plenty of other apartments not worth your time. Generally speaking, in Portugal, the way that it works is that the agent is paid by the owner of the property, not the person who is leasing the property. This changes in different countries. Some countries, it's people who are going to be the lessee. Sometimes it's the lessor. It just really depends on where you are. But in Portugal, the normal thing, generally speaking, is that the agent is paid by the owner. In the case, if you are going to purchase property, you may actually have to sign with an agent that they will help you search within their area and that you are exclusive to them for X amount of time. That's a little bit of a different situation and another subject for another day. But even that, personally, I don't think I would feel so comfortable with, especially if I had never traveled to the place before. The next thing I want to get into, which is somewhat related, and that is another topic that I've mentioned briefly, is about dealing with accountants in Portugal. I think actually, especially for the way that people have to come here and considering D7s and all of that, an accountant is really worth talking to get everything in order and to really know what your situation will be. But anybody who is going to ask you for that money up front for a consultation fee, I would also say avoid them. I've lived in different countries. I've worked with accountants in all over the place, and I can say it is really not worthwhile. The initial consultation is not for you to just chit chat and talk. It's for them to show you that they can actually help you and understand your situation. I've unfortunately seen a lot of these accountants that charge the upfront consulting fee. They just run through a script. They just run you through the mill. That's all they're looking for. There's the online payment consulting call, the expert opinion, whatever, that a lot of them just are trying to copy and paste from one person to the next. Even there was someone who I had been in contact with. I said I was interested in A, B, and C. They quoted me an outrageous price for a consulting fee, and they said they would offer me X, Y, and Z. And I was not interested in X, Y, or Z. I was only interested in A, B, and C. There are a lot of these services that shouldn't be paid for, in my personal opinion, and this is all a part of what I've called in the past and still call the expat tax. It's really important to know when this comes up and how to avoid it. The way that you avoid it, thank you, next. But speaking of next, just before we get into the rest of this episode, I do want to say a huge thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible through Patreon, patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria, RafaelDiFuria.com/Patreon, as well as the one-time support through RafaelDiFuria.com/support, as well as the purchase of the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more. All of these go to help this project to be able to continue. So thank you all so very, very much. But to get into this next point, when talking about Portugal, it's important to consider that a lot of people coming are going to be looking at something like the D7 visa, where having, well, even maybe the golden visa, where having a place where you're going to be residing is actually part of the application process. You have to have that all taken care of before you even are approved to be here. That's part of your approval, is showing that you will have that place to live. But there are many people, whether it's for time constraints or they're just unavailable or they have the inability due to financial reasons that they could afford to move here, but to travel back and forth and to start hunting around different parts of the country or whatever it may not be realistic. And so there are plenty of people who do rent sight unseen, or they'll have a virtual walkthrough, either with the agent doing a video tour that's recorded and send it to them after, or like what happened in my case, even though I didn't come here with a D7 visa, I wanted to have my apartment set up from the get-go. We did a WhatsApp call. For me, also as somebody who enjoys time on the internet and has to work with a mobile connection sometimes, even though I do have a wired connection, I also was curious to see how the agent's connection would be throughout the apartment when they were showing it. And it was actually pretty good. So after, also, this was kind of double duty for me to not only do research about the place where I want to live, but also the potential company that I want to go with for my cellular service in the future. But really having the ability to go into the city or area, region that you're interested in can make a huge difference, because I have seen so many people, not just here in Portugal, but different countries, ending up in an apartment that they did a virtual walkthrough of the inside of their apartment, but they didn't get to see the neighborhood around it. This is huge, because you could absolutely love your apartment that you end up in, but you may not necessarily love the area that it's in. I've been to plenty of apartments like that. I got really lucky, actually. There was one apartment here that I was very interested in before moving to Braga, and the apartment was just right, met pretty much all of my needs. However, after coming to Braga, I'm really glad that I didn't take that apartment. Not that the neighborhood is bad, I just wouldn't want to live there. Because also in my situation, I didn't have the time or ability to come out. Even though I was living in Italy, I was under a time crunch to make everything happen. And so the only availability that I really had was to actually make the move itself, not to come and go back and forth between the countries. So I definitely understand those people who do sign without actually visiting in person. That's what I did with the apartment that I'm in right now. And based on the research that I was able to do beforehand, and also have a rough idea of what I wanted and what I needed, and also getting a bit lucky, that is definitely a part of it, I ended up on a street that I am really happy with. And even within my neighborhood, maybe one or two streets over, I don't think I would want to live on those streets. But my street, specifically where I live, I do like it. This is the place where if I would have traveled here ahead of time, I would have aimed for roughly this space to begin with. But even, for example, there can be the situation where maybe you look at some online resources such as Google Maps to look at Street View, as well as you do a virtual tour through a video call or whatever. And so this person actually really ended up hating the location where they live, because apartment is fantastic. But on Google Street View, it just happened to be a day that the Street View car took a picture. The street was completely empty, so they assumed that it was going to be a very quiet neighborhood. It ends up that it's one of the more major roads in the city, and they get a lot of noise from the street, unfortunately. But the next thing that I want to mention is, do not be afraid to negotiate. This is one of the reasons why I mentioned in a previous episode, my walkthrough of Braga, actually. One of the reasons why prices keep going up is because people don't negotiate the way that people expect them to. This is something that in a lot of the world is not uncommon. It happens. Maybe you're going to have some landlords who aren't interested in negotiating. The list price is the one that it's at. And this is also one of the reasons why I would say, if you've never been to the country before, if you don't speak the language, that having somebody on your side with you can help you a bit, just because you'll be able to ask them, hey, how much can I negotiate? What would you recommend in this situation if you were in my shoes? I'm not putting any pressure on you. I'm not saying if you don't get this that I'm going to get back to you and sue you or anything. Like, no, just like if you were in my position, what would you do? How much would you negotiate? So I've seen even apartments going down by a third. This can happen. Maybe even more. Is that always going to be the case? No. Sometimes it's maybe only going to be 50 euros or 100 euros, but it also could be a few hundred euros of savings per month. So definitely keep that in mind. Also, another thing regarding where you're going to be living, especially if you're not able to come and check it in person. Find out if the apartment has double pane windows or single pane. Insulated windows will make a huge difference when it comes to wintertime and also summertime. If you have an air conditioning unit, it's not super common to find those. Do they exist? Definitely. Are they becoming more popular? That's what I hear is the trend, is that more and more people are getting them. But this is something that you're not guaranteed. Also, you're not even guaranteed to have a dryer. A lot of apartments will have a washing machine, though, so you will be pretty safe there. But also keep in mind that in Portugal, the landlords can increase the rent based on inflation and I believe maybe one or two other factors. Last year it was 0.5%, but right now they're talking about this year potentially 5.5% of an increase that the landlords could request. So that's one thing I would say definitely keep in mind, is that the price that is written in the contract can change throughout time. Just keep in mind. But the next thing that is actually a huge mistake that I see so many people make, it's not necessarily something that's practical, it's more on the experiential side of things, but that is not getting well acquainted with the local foods and not getting acquainted with the versions that the locals like. There are so many times I see people, oh, I tried X, Y, and Z at such and such place, but the place that they went to is like one of the most touristy places that does one of the worst versions of that dish. I mean, francesinha, for example, one of my favorite dishes in this country, can be really bad. I've had some that like were really put me off. And actually my very first francesinha really put me off and I almost never tried one again. But I then went to some places that the locals like, that they end up really being the popular choices amongst the people who are from here. Then I really fell in love with the dish. And then I really got to have a good idea of what the dish really has to offer. So be willing to explore. Sometimes things can look a little different, a little strange, but oof, the flavors, those are definitely there. The next mistake I see that I have spoken about so many times is learn the language, even if it's only basic words and phrases. It is so important and makes a difference at the end of the day. Okay, if you're going to Lisbon, maybe you'll find yourself in plenty of situations where people are going to be speaking to you in English. And in general, I would say the Portuguese, in comparison to many other countries, will be more likely to speak English. However, it's always good to be polite, to try and not just walk into a place and start speaking English if it's your first language. If it's not your first language, then I would say it's a little bit of a different category. But in that situation, just walking in, waltzing in, and just yammering up a storm, you may find someone that actually doesn't speak the language. So don't just assume. And you can ask them, do you speak English? It's a very simple phrase that you can learn, as well as some other basic things. They're really going to make all the difference with your experience and allow you to open up to people. And maybe sometimes people say, oh no, I don't speak English, but then you find out actually they do speak English and their English is pretty good. They're just a little shy to speak. The most major mistake, though, when it comes to languages is speaking louder does not mean that the person is going to understand you. I've had this happen to me, and I'll admit maybe when I was a kid, I did the same. But having been in countries where if the language isn't mine, I can definitely say that when people raise their voice to me because they think I can't hear them, that doesn't necessarily change. Sometimes speaking slower is actually the thing that will make a bit more of a difference, enunciating a little bit more and trying to lose the accent from your country and learn how the people pronounce things in their country. because sometimes I will go out and say this flat out. The American accent can be very, very rough in other languages. But also quickly back to food for just a moment. Many restaurants do have menus that are in English and Portuguese, but if you start seeing 20 different languages listed, maybe better to avoid. But this is, again, one of the situations where knowing at least a few words, the difference between beef, steak, chicken, turkey, fish. For example, the other night I was out and there was a sausage that I was curious to try called alheira. It's got an interesting history, but I didn't really bother to look at the ingredients because I was with other people and we were just ordering a bunch of things and sharing them. Because what I had known about this dish is that it was just not supposed to be with pork. I don't care about pork, eating pork, it's fine. It's just not my favorite thing. But what I didn't think about was what other kinds of meats could be in there. And so the one that I happened to try as my first experience was, it was a mixture of, I believe, rabbit and bird game. So it's not something that I would have ordered personally. My first experience eating something that contains rabbit, I can say probably my last time that I will let that happen. It was the same sort of situation as the horse pizza that I had in Italy. Thankfully, not as traumatic. That situation was really at the top as far as traumatizing meals go, but something I'll be a bit more careful about in the future. So if you don't want to be surprised, it's good to have a few of those words along with you. Worst case scenario, Google Translate, but sometimes in the old restaurants, in the old buildings, you may not have such a great signal. That's happened to me a number of times. But getting more a little bit to the practical side of things, I have seen people ship their whole house worth of belongings to Europe, not just Portugal. And homes in this part of the world tend to be a bit smaller than what you might expect in, for example, the US. So that big, giant couch that you may have had in your large home back in the States, you'll have to start thinking about whether that is actually going to fit in your new apartment or not. And I mean, sometimes even just doing a little bit of masking tape on the floor or having some cardboard to just get a rough idea of the dimensions, that could help you out in the end. At the very least, just to get an idea of what things could feel like in comparison to where you are now. Maybe you're going to be here in Portugal and thinking about having one of your friends or family members organizing your move and having other people pack for you. And that's actually another thing. I would definitely recommend having people pack, because that is a huge, huge headache that can save you so much time and energy so that you can devote to other things that may be a little bit more necessary for your move. And then also, if you do have like family portraits or family heirlooms that are really important, always good to carry those with you in carry-on. Never check in anything so irreplaceable. But another thing also, when bringing things into Portugal, depending on how you're coming here, you theoretically can get a tax-free shipment, but you have to make sure that you organize it just in the right way so that you don't have to pay customs fees or importation tax when you're bringing your items home. Or even, for example, if you're making an order from the US or outside of the European Union, you may have to pay the tax upon importation before it's even released to you. And that's something that can actually add to the shipment time. So you're paying the sales tax potentially in the country of origin and then again locally here in Portugal before you can get the item. But there are some websites that do exist that do shipments through like DHL or some other type of payment that will allow you to pay the tax up front ahead of time. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But I've had experiences where it doesn't always work. And actually, I had one shipment that I had. It was thankfully a very small one, but I prepaid the tax, but I still had to pay the Portuguese importation tax, even though I had prepaid it. And so that was, thankfully, it was only like a few euros. And I was just like, okay, whatever. It's more worth it just to have it here rather than take the time to go through the headaches of fighting over a few euros, maybe 2 or 3 euros. Yeah, that's 2 or 3 euros not in my pocket, which is a bit frustrating. But at the end of the day, I can put my time and efforts into other things that will be better for me. But then also one thing about bringing your things over, it's very worthwhile to compare and contrast different shipping methods. And sometimes the shipping method that you might think could be the most expensive could end up being the cheapest. Or ideas that you hadn't thought of before. So there are a lot of people that will get a container shipped to them, but there are some companies out there that will do partial containers and allow you to divide it, and they'll kind of divide it between a few customers, ship it to another country, and then have it brought by truck from somewhere else to you here. This is just another thing that can be possible, not always going to be the easiest option, but can be one of the options that makes the most financial sense. Otherwise, you may find yourself in other situations where taking a bunch of extra luggage with you can be cheaper than sending things via UPS, FedEx, or even a partial shipping container. Although you're going to have limits on how big things can be. You're not going to be able to bring a whole lazy boy with you on the airplane, nor do I think you would want to. And then you have to also take into consideration the next point, whether it would be cheaper to replace the items that you have versus buying them over again. And when it comes to maybe something like your wardrobe, it's not necessarily the worst thing to buy clothes locally that help you blend in with the local population more, although in some countries, the sizes that are available may be problematic for you. I mean, I'm 6'1", not exactly massive, but I'm tall and maybe a little bit taller than a lot of people, but I do also have broad shoulders. And so I do struggle to find things that can fit me or fit the right proportions. I had the same problem in Italy. For me, generally speaking, Northern Europe has things that are closer to my size. Portugal, actually in the north here, I can find things. But again, you do have to take these things into consideration. So if you're a larger person, are you going to be able to buy those things for yourself here in Portugal? Or if your body type is a little bit closer to what people generally have here, maybe it's going to be easier for you. I mean, H&M, Zara, whatever, these places exist. And sometimes some of these fast fashion outlets may cost you less in the end than actually shipping over everything. But then also, for example, if you wanted to bring a car here, some of those very large American cars and trucks may not be the best idea on small Portuguese streets and alleys. That's another thing to take into consideration. Even you could be in a city and have to drive down a very narrow alley to get to where you're trying to go, depending on how you're going and where you're coming from. And some of them are very, very small. So maybe something like a Dodge Ram might be tricky in some areas, whereas maybe out in the country, if you have a full standing home and you have a bit of land, yeah, okay, that Dodge Ram out here, not going to be a problem. Probably actually even a little bit better to have and help you with some of the hills that you do find here in Portugal. But no matter what you do, the one thing that you should make sure that you either buy here or bring with you, that I have seen so many people make this mistake on, is bring proper walking shoes with you. You have a lot of cobblestone streets here, or streets that aren't 100% properly paved and maybe cracking apart. And so this is not a knock on Portugal. It's just a reality of something that you find here. So having some good shoes that you can get around in is going to be big. I've seen some very adventurous women trying to walk on the Portuguese tile sidewalks here in high spike heels. Probably not the best idea. Probably something, maybe a platform could work a little bit better. Or even if you are a guy, having a sneaker with a little bit of a thicker sole is going to go a long way here. Even wearing Converse, for example, may not necessarily always be the best idea. Do you see some people wearing them? Yeah, but always better if you can have just a little bit of a thicker sole. It's going to be a lot more comfortable to get around. But this is where I'm going to end off this episode. So, of course, a huge, huge thank you to those of you who helped to support this project through the one-time donations, rafaeldifuria.com/support, or the monthly support. That really helps to keep this project going. rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/rafaeldifuria, as well as the purchase of the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more. Thank you all so very much for helping this project to be able to continue. Of course, as always, stay safe and healthy out there. I'm Rafael Di Furia, and this has been another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. And I'll see you all next time. Later.